Turn off the music.
Okay.
Please don't stop the beat.
I'm going to be extra careful. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Josh. I'm sort of a newish member to the club in the last 8 months or so, but I've been brewing for about 10 years. I lived out in Calgary for a while, moved back here in 2019. Then there was a global incident that you guys may be familiar with that kept me from getting involved with the club. But now I'm finally starting to get more involved. And I remember starting out 10 years ago, spending hours and hours pouring through Homebrew Talk forums, looking for the answers to my questions, finding 5 or 6 different answers that conflicted with each other, people's anecdotes, people's opinions that were blatantly wrong, some great information, but a lot of not so good information. And so I kind of went down a path of testing out variables myself as much as I could. I have a chemical engineering background, BJCP judge. I have a certification from UC Davis for brewing as well. So I put all that knowledge, to the test along with what I know about brewing and tried to figure out what the actual truth of the matter was. And that's what this series of presentations is hopefully going to be. And I'm calling it Demystifying Brewing. So the problem, like I just discussed, there's a lot of conflicting information out there. I know our motto is relax, don't worry, have a homebrew, but sometimes you don't want to relax, you want answers. You want to figure out what's actually going on. So how can we figure out what actually matters when it comes to making great beer? Well, I would suggest that we work together as a club to actually...
Διόρισε τον έλεγχο για τις συμβάσεις του ΨΕ και ο προϊστάμενος της αρχής το ξέπλυμα βρώμικου χρήματος Χαράλαμπος Βουρλιώτης. Συνεχίζονται οι θεώρησης και τους δύο...
It definitely sounds Spanish.
Was it Portuguese? Go ahead.
Okay.
It was Greek.
It sounded Spanish.
All right, we're just going to pretend that didn't happen. The proposed solution that I have is that we actually come together as a group because we have a big group of very accomplished brewers, and we actually try these things out ourselves, and we taste the science, so to speak. We actually taste the effects of changing a certain variable. Rather than reading about it and guessing what the people tasted, we actually taste it ourselves. And the gold standard for sensory perception testing is the triangle test, which Brewlosophy uses the same test. You may be familiar with that. So the triangle test is basically brew 2 beers, essentially identical beers except for one difference, and then fill 3 identical cups, like the ones in front of you. In my opinion, opaque is better because we want to eliminate any sort of visual bias and just focus on the aroma and the flavor. Fill 2 of those cups with one beer and 1 of those cups with the other beer. So one of these cups out of the 3 is different. And your job is to figure out which cup that is, basically. And then we're going to see as a group if we can reliably identify the unique cup. And by reliably, I mean, is it statistically significant? And we can go into more details about that in a second. So in front of you, you've got 3 cups. If you've already dived in and need a refill, just come see me. I can top you up. But let's try a group triangle test.
Did you put the same single beer in the same number of cups?
Not necessarily.
So like C on one cup would be different to C on the other in another group.
Definitely could be.
Then how are you going to keep track of
How are you going to
right?
keep track of
Oh
that?
man, I spent a lot of time on that. So I built
Oh, you wrote it. You registered who had what.
what's that?
You took note of who had what.
Yeah, exactly. So I have a key sheet here, and I'm like a very amateur web developer, so I tried to make my own database system here that we're going to try out right now. We'll see if it works. But essentially, if you scan this QR code with your phone, you should be taken to a form that lets you do a triangle test. If you have any issues, just constantly move. And if anyone doesn't want to use technology, I get it. I do. Okay, I encourage you to use this because we'll get your results and see them in real time. But if you don't want to, I do have a hard copy if you prefer.
My phone doesn't do that anyway, it doesn't do what I put.
Okay.
It's an old thing.
Anybody else need one of these? No, it's okay. It's all secret. Is anyone having issues with the form coming up? Okay, good. Did you hear the instructions? You have a form? Yeah, I got it recently. Okay, so you just basically type your number into the rest of the stuff.
I'm already getting developed.
So just to be super clear, the ID number obviously is the number on your cups, and A, B, and C is the cup. Yeah, these are, well, I'll go into the recipe after, but yes. You weren't vegan, right? No.
Sorry, can you go back to the...
Yes.
No, I was convinced. But apparently I was wrong. Because it tells me yes. I am saying for error.
I'll give you guys a couple more minutes.
How many refills are we allowed to?
As many as you want.
He's got a whole bunch
Just give me $50 after.
Just make sure you can drive home.
Why did that?
What's the ABV on this?
It's roughly 5.5%. Like Shane mentioned, this is a Keller beer, so it's like a young Munich Helles. probably a little yeasty because it was in my car sloshing around on the way here.
Gelatin. Beer flavored Jello. Look at that.
That sounds cool.
Craft beer is juicy.
So does anyone need more time? That's totally fine if you do.
None.
No problem, no problem.
You just wanted my answer, don't you?
While you guys go, I'll...
What is it? Is it like?
No, I know that.
Okay, everybody good? Anybody not good? Okay, anytime. I'll get it after. So, did most people detect a difference? Yeah, put up your hand if you did. Okay.
Well, detect would be right, would be wrong.
Well, there is no wrong answer. We just want to see if you can actually, if this variable that we're testing, which I'll tell you about in a second here, matters. If it doesn't matter, you won't detect a difference. If it does, then statistically we probably will. So it sounds like maybe half the group, or maybe a bit more than half the group, did notice a difference, which is interesting. Does anyone have a guess of what the difference was? Okay, interesting. Any other guesses?
It seemed like a yeast thing.
A yeast thing? Okay.
Yeast.
I think the gradient is different.
Sorry, go
Difference
ahead.
in the maltiness.
Difference in the maltiness?
Yeah, it's like the cereal sort of flavor.
Okay, so maybe a grain bill or something? Okay,
Fermentation parameters?
that's very vague.
I'm not good enough to know if it's temperature or pressure.
It's a very good answer because we were testing pressure fermenting. So one of these beers was fermented under pressure. I'll get to the details, and the other one wasn't. So the theory here, probably a lot of you already know this, but the theory here is that fermenting beer under a constant head pressure, usually plus 15 psi or more, suppresses yeast-derived flavors, primarily esters, right? The fruitiness that you get from yeast.
That's the librarian, isn't it?
So supposedly this can allow you to produce clean, crisp lagers at room temperature and at record speed, which has some implications, especially for if you're a professional brewer, you got to get beer up quickly without any negative off flavors. So what should we expect? Well, there was a
Άμα μη σκεφτάρω στις βολές στην Ουκρανία.
That was the doorbell.
I gotta sit here.
Είχα να ξέρω.
Making it worse.
I don't know what it is.
There was a paper done back in 2001, actually, which brewed 4 identical beers back to back. One was a warm beer with low pressure, so that would be like a room temperature lager, 16 degrees. Another was a cold beer at low pressure, which is like your standard lager.
You know what I do? Hold on.
Can you hear me?
Hold on. Tell you
Speak
what.
up and we'll not use that.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Dave, just keep it off and he can just speak up.
Go ahead. Just speak up, Josh. I haven't got a clue what I was doing.
So 4 beers back to back, a warm, like a room temperature lager, a standard lager, a warm and high pressure lager, and a cold and high pressure lager. And there's a lot of data here, but one thing that's interesting, that the sugar consumption rate, which is a good proxy for the speed of fermentation, was about double at the high temperature beers, regardless of pressure.
Sorry, what is the difference here?
So the sugar consumption rate in the red box there,
Oh, the yeast consumption is sugar, okay.
that's how fast the sugar is being eaten up by the yeast, exactly. Which is kind of an indicator of how fast. Sorry? You could say that, yeah. Sugar was eaten twice as fast.
When it was warm.
What's that?
When it's warm, it heats.
Yes, exactly. When it's warm.
So,
Yeah.
is warm like room temperature warm?
Yeah, so in this test, 16 degrees is warm. And this was a lager beer. And that's column 1 and column 3. Right? So you see negative 1.15, negative 1.18.
Okay.
Those are twice as big as negative 0.56, 0.59. So temperature but not pressure dictates how fast fermentation happens. But fusel alcohols were the same. Fusel alcohols, which are like the nasty higher alcohols that you get sometimes when you brew beer that's too hot, ferments too hot, also increased with temperature. So that's kind of debunking the theory right off the bat. Like, if we're raising the temperature regardless of pressure, we're going to get more of these nasty alcohols, which is not what we want. Although, it's pretty tight. 102 versus 115 versus 120 versus 103. They're pretty tight. The flavor threshold here is 70 to 800. So, are you going to detect a difference when you taste it? I don't know. That's why we're doing this test.
Pinch rates were the same.
What's that?
Pinch rates were the same.
Pinch rates doesn't say here, but I assume they were the same. If they did good science, they're the same. And then next slide here shows two things. Biomass, which is just a fancy word for the yeast, how much yeast there was. This is interesting, I think, especially for people that like to do hazy IPAs like Marcello over there. The biomass is way, way more. There's way more yeast in the warm and low pressure lager than there is in any of the other ones. And the lowest level of yeast was in the high pressure beers. Now I say that might be interesting for a hazy guy because the more yeast you have in suspension, the more it can pull those hop oils out and settle to the bottom, and you lose it, right? So that might be something to consider.
So sorry, Paul, you said the different, the yeast, more yeast, that means more yeast was produced, like,
Yeah, they started, assuming Shane's comment is correct, they started with the same amount of yeast, and then at the end they measured how much yeast they had, and they had roughly double on the warm and low pressure beer. But the high pressure beers had the lowest amount of yeast.
over them. So if you pitch 100 mil, you might have, let's say 200 with the lower pressure, you might have 120 in high pressure, like less.
The other way around, but yes, you get more in the low pressure warm beer.
Do you know in this case if it was one batch divided in four different batches attempting to be the same? My point here is if it was a big batch, it could be that there was more sugar in the beginning and less at the end kind of idea.
That's a good question.
Or if it were two different batches, one was better refrigerated than the other, so maybe more O2.
That's exactly what I thought too. Did they measure the oxygen rate? Because that's going to change how much yeast propagates, right? And they didn't. I didn't see any data on that, so they might have been a bit sloppy on that. And that
Yeah,
would,
it's small equipment, right?
Yeah.
It's very hard.
so that could definitely change, especially the biomass. But the interesting thing here, though, at the bottom, is your esters. Total esters, right at the bottom there. They really are reduced on high pressure, just like the theory says. So same temperature, higher pressure, less esters, which is kind of what the theory said. So there might be something to this theory. And we're not the only ones to, oh, and there's your flavor threshold. Again, whether or not we can taste it is up to interpretation.
What's the threshold, did you say?
0.3 to 33, depending on the ester that you're measuring. And those are estimates. So we're not the first people to do this test, obviously. Escarpment Labs actually did this with their crispy strain, which is a Kvike. I think that's kind of an odd choice because Kvikes are very good at high temperature. So raising the temperature and putting some pressure on it, I don't know if that's such a great test. Brewlosophy obviously has done this. They came out with, they actually did lab testing, measured the esters and the fusels, and they found that the beer fermented under pressure has more esters. So the exact opposite of what that paper said and what the theory says. Weist and Bleekman came together, they did a block. They showed reduced ester fusel, so again, contradicts what Brewlosophy said. Scott James did this. He did in my opinion, a really bad comparison. He didn't even brew the same beer. He did a different beer, different yeast. Not really a comparison at all. Did you?
Which one you said it had more ester than the pressure?
The Brewlosophy one's second one there. They did lab testing and they saw that it had.
So there is something that, just to add to your points there, there is something that I only ferment under pressure now. Everything is under pressure. And on a small, up to 50 liters or something like that, right? And I do notice that right in the beginning, when there is the yeast is just starting and there is the sugar taste and all of that, instead of going out, it stays within the beer and dissolves, right? So it might not be ester from, how do you explain this? From accelerated fermentation. It's something that was supposed to go out, but stayed within the beer.
Right.
There's a difference than a open fermentation that went too hard.
And I had the same thing. I brewed a lager under pressure, and it had a lot of sulfur. And the one under pressure kept its sulfur forever. I couldn't get rid of the sulfur. I ended up putting a penny in it which is kind of bad, because copper makes cupric sulfide, I think, and it takes the sulfur out of solution, but it's also like poisonous.
It's also good for the yeast. With the yeast though, like if you got the copper,
A tiny bit, but a full penny, probably not the best idea. But yes, absolutely, it couldn't come out of solution, so it just stays. Where else is it going to go, right? The Apartment Brewer, he's a YouTuber. You may have seen some of his videos. He did this as well with Czech pills. He found faster fermentation, more sulfur, like I mentioned. He did a limited triangle test. Most detected a difference. By limited, I mean like him, his girlfriend, and his mom did it.
So 2 on 3.
And I brewed a Marzen recently. I found that it was with 3470. Very clean fermentation. It actually won a bronze medal. But 3470, maybe again not the best yeast for this kind of comparison because its range is so big. It's such a good yeast. It can do amazing things. So maybe not the best comparison for this.
So what yeast would you use for under pressure?
Good question. That's coming up. That's what we use here. So let's go into the recipe, which directly ties into what you just asked in there. So Munikel's Keller beer, full hand Keller beer, just because I was under a time crunch. It's pretty young. I chose a pale malty lager for a reason here. Again, it's the most common use case for pressure fermentation because if you're a young home brewer that doesn't have a fridge separate for temperature control, but you might have a corny keg laying around, you can do pressure fermentation. And maybe, if this is true, you can make a good lager without a temperature controller. Again, a pale lager, there's nothing to hide behind, so it should be easier to detect any flavor differences, theoretically. And typically the yeast used for a pale lager are more heavily impacted by higher temperatures, barring some of the things we just talked about, like W3470. I made this recipe loosely based on Keith Haynes and Chris Saunders' recipe, kind of a Frankenstein of the two from the GTA Brews recipe database. If you guys haven't checked it out yet, check it out. It's a really good database of some award-winning recipes. I use standard malt bill, Pilsner, Vienna, a little bit of Munich, a couple hop additions, pale malty water profile. So grist, hops, yeast, water, all identical in both beers. Mash and boil, identical in both beers. 60-minute infusion at 152. pH was in a good range, 5.34. Batch sparge, Vorlapped in between, so there wasn't a lot of grain getting in there. There's nothing to throw the readings off. Extra quick chill, courtesy of Mother Nature. Thanks for that.
So there you go.
And then some people get their panties in a twist about the fermentation vessel geometry. So to take that out of the equation, I did them in the exact same vessels, which is actually the kegs that I'm serving from. I transferred out and then transferred back in. So geometry is exactly the same. Oxygenation was exactly the same. Pure O2, 90 seconds. And the yeast, to get to your question, I chose White Labs 820 Oktoberfest Marzen strategically because it has a very narrow and low temperature range, so 11 to 14 degrees C. That's only a 3-degree range, 4-degree range, I guess. And it's important to note here that I pitched very, very high. I did 2 starters. I blew the guidelines for a recommended lager out of the water. I typically like to pitch high, but I just wanted to make sure that we didn't have any weird fermentation issues going on with one not growing as fast as the other, whatever. So I just pitched really high. Forgot about it.
If you do this, can you repitch again? You get how many times when you repitch the yeast after you do pressure ferment?
Yeah.
You can repitch.
You can. There is more stress on it, but yes, you can. Now I don't know how that impacts it long term.
That becomes pretty complicated. In a large, small scale, maybe okay, but in a large scale, people try not to let it up.
Okay.
If you think about a huge tank, there is pressure right there, right? But once you cruise right at the top, then you're going to increase the real pressure at the bottom, which might stress the yeast up to a certain point. So let's just say without the pressure, you do 6 or 7 repeat. People would say that 3 would be a kind of a
Small scale.
yeah, so they do check on the lab. If you have your microscope and check the health of the yeast, but it's a different ball game, and you do stress them for the walls, right?
Good info, thanks.
Oh, it's because the yeast at the bottom will get so crushed.
Yes.
When you think about it, like a huge, like Molson, for example, they got skyscraper tanks. The bottom of those tanks is very high pressure.
Yeah, so what kind of yeast are we talking about?
Totally, it could be totally different yeast. And they may have like fine-tuned that over years. and
Yeah,
years.
those yeast ferment the whole thing, whatever you want in a couple of days.
Right.
Now, another question too is when you do an under pressure ferment,
Yep.
how much headspace do you need?
You really don't need much.
If you do like a 5-gallon batch, you can put it into a carboy, you'd be fine, or so.
Yeah, like the pressure is actually going to help you with the krausen. It's not going to get, in my experience, it's not going to get out of control. But you should leave a little bit because you are going to get some foaming there a little bit. But it's not like an open fermentation or like or Belgian where it's like going crazy. In my experience, it's very, very calm.
And then when you finish fermenting under pressure, how do you transfer out?
So that's an awesome perk of this because your vessel's under pressure.
Right.
So I don't need to screw around with siphons and all this other junk. I can just add more pressure, pump it out of the outlet into another tank.
Right, but my point, where I was going with that is all that yeast will drop, so it takes so much of it off.
Yeah, so one technique for that is you can cut your dip tube so that it's a little higher off.
Okay.
I don't like to do that because I don't like to break a cake. A better solution in my opinion is to use a floating dip tube.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I have been doing.
Yeah.
I try cutting.
Yeah.
And it's a 50-50 chance that you're gonna get some, and then it will be fine. And then you stop because the phone is ringing when you start again. Again, a bunch of beans and now the floater is a
There's a nice new one out on eBay. Floated 2.0.
That's what I use.
Yeah.
Great.
That's what we get. The shipping costs a fortune to get over here from California.
We should do a group buy.
Listen, that's what I get on that.
So fermentations, everything has been identical up to here. Fermentation is where things divert. One keg obviously was cold, so 10 degrees atmospheric pressure. That's it in the fridge there with a blow-off line. The other keg, I put it in my spare bedroom. It was at 20 degrees, so room temperature, and 20 psi. So double the temperature, double the pressure, and that's 6 degrees above the max recommended for that yeast. So way, way above what it would suggest.
Okay.
And if you're curious, both beers kicked off super quick, probably because I pitched so much yeast. by day 5 it was already starting to slow. So the blue line there is just showing the temperature of the cold beer. After 5 days, I bumped it up to 2 to 12 degrees, still within range. After another day or two, bumped it up another 2 to 14, still within range. By then it was done. Fermentation FG was at terminal FG. And then both of them went down. Actually, sorry. One went up to 19 for a diacetyl rest for a couple days. And then both of them went down to 2 degrees for 4 weeks or something for lager.
So you still have to lager your lager?
I don't know if you have to, but it's definitely going to help you with clarity. I think it's going to help you clean it up in general as well. So this is what they look like. I know you probably couldn't see them in your cup, but this is what they look like. Pretty much exactly the same. The only difference, it's hard to see here, the right, which is the conventional lager, was a bit clearer, a little bit clearer, which makes total sense because it spent more time at cold temperatures than the other one. We know things drop out faster at hot temperatures. FG, pretty much the same, 1 point. I think that's basically the same. Finishing pH, pretty much the same within the margin of error of the instrument. Color, head, all the same. But how did it taste? Go ahead.
Sorry, back to your so once you got your home gravity, then you put it in the fridge to
4 weeks. Then I did the diacetyl rest for 2 days, I think. So 19 degrees. And I just let it clean itself up.
So you went from room temperature, you do it higher for the acid runs?
Well, no, I just went up to
The fridge one. It's already warm enough to know it's there.
Right, that's what I'm
yeah, sorry. I'm not very clear here, but
As long as they stop the fermentation.
yeah, the pressurized one I just left at room temp because it was at room temp. It finished quickly, not super quickly, but probably a day faster. I would attribute that to the amount of yeast I pitched. If I had pitched less, I bet the difference in speed would be a lot different. It'd probably be a lot faster. So we went through like the specs of the beer. They're pretty much the same. Color, clarity, a little bit different, but pretty much the same. Really, the proof is in the pudding. How did they taste? And that's why you guys are here doing this test. Let's see if we can take a look at your results.
Seal time.
Fingers crossed.
See if you're right.
I would like to point out that I got the right reason. I got the wrong beer.
Half points. We have to. Okay, demographics. So we had 18 responses. 5 BJCP judges, which is great. 4 have extra sensory training, which is awesome. We've got an enthusiast, which is someone that I suppose has not brewed beer before. We've got 4 of them, actually. Homebrewer, 9. Advanced BCP judge, we've got 3 of them. So those are people with quite a bit of judging experience. And the result is not statistically significant, so 7 out of 18. So this p-value that I'm referencing here, 0.39, p-value is an indication of the statistical significance. For something to be significant, you need a p-value less than or equal to 0.05. Ours is 0.39, which is way, way, way far from 0.05.
Wait, so 7 people got it right? Or
7 people guessed the correct cup.
Jesus.
I can explain what that happens. So it happens something to be able wrong, and I am BJCP certified, this is early. So the Shane got wrong as well.
I got it wrong too.
Yeah. So I asked him, did you guess? Not everybody already did, but did you guess same? He said yes.
Like I say,
But we're different
Your
letters.
cups could be different.
different numbers.
We're different letters.
Oh, okay.
Could be different.
We both got wrong, but it was the same, it was like the same thing. And somehow, the first cup had a lot more hops than the second. And then the third one was obviously smoother. So I was like, where is the catch, right? Is it the smoother one, which was the correct answer, or the hoppier? And he got the same thing, the hoppier. We thought this was a hoppier. So my point here is such a small thing. And we got the first cars with more hops. So my point is, when you do next time, try to do for the same guy. 1 and 1 go together for the same guy. You know what I mean? Then the next one and one goes to that the same guy because maybe I got one from the beginning of the pour.
Oh,
And-
four speed.
You know what I mean? And then the hops are gone because it's getting from the bottom or top or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the problem is, like, I mentioned this before, this came in my car, so it was like,
I think for me, one of mine was really yeasty.
yeah.
So that's the one I identified as different, but it could have just been like the dregs or gotten
Yeah, that's-
shaken up or something like that.
I feel a little bit hoppier.
Yeah. Like it
Ideally,
could have just gotten a bit more yeast in it. but-
ideally, you'd let it sit for a day, let it settle out, get
Yeah.
a clean pour, but, you know, we're doing the best we can, so.
There's so many other issues that could happen.
Yeah. But I did get it wrong, and I had the access to the beers obviously before you guys did, and I did it not blind. So I just did it. I poured myself the beers. I knew which beers they were, and I was like, I got this. Like, this is easy. And then I did a blind test, and I got it wrong. So it just shows that you have really no idea what you're talking about.
I had number 4. You tell me which is the different? Is number 4?
Yeah, well, I'll show you all the results after.
Well, he's paper.
Oh, yeah, I'll still show you the results. Don't worry.
Because he wants to see if he was wrong.
Yeah, let's go with August.
So, but this is the high, one of these mixes is the highest temperature, but the results that you mentioned, no one would tell. You said, what is that?
So
What does that tell us about that?
that's a great question. So the question is,
Because we never brewed lagers because we don't have, I don't have a fridge to brew.
right.
So I couldn't brew lagers.
It's a common problem. So the question is, like, what does this mean, basically? Most of us got it wrong. So I would say that statistically, anyways, this means that you can ferment a lager under pressure at room temperature, and no one will know the difference.
It'll ferment like cold.
And you won't know the difference.
But is that the pressure that does it?
That's, yeah, because really that's the only variable that we change.
But you changed the temperature as well.
Yeah.
So you changed two variables.
And yet it's still not statistical.
Yes, but you changed two variables. They could be canceling each other out. You said you only changed one, so therefore you were statistically invalidating yourself. You were saying it is a pressure base, but it could be temperature.
Could be, but that would be pretty unlikely given all our experience with
As someone who has
lagers.
studied stats.
You're absolutely right. I'll give you that other half point. Okay?
Well, it's because when you said pressure, then you said you changed the temperature too. I'm like, that
You're right. There's two
They
variables.
could cancel each other out. Because maintaining temperature and pressure might be
And
noticed.
that's what Escarpment did on that first one.
Yeah.
But they found similar results.
Like, I'm giving you shit, but yeah, if you changed both of them or only one, you might get different results. Maybe pressure and temperature would cancel each other out.
Possible they could cancel each other out. That first study that was here,
Yeah, paper you were reading?
yeah, they did do that, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, one time. Go ahead.
Did you ever have to see on here?
No. And I'll give you the results if you want to compare your individual cups just at the end of here. But to prevent cheating, I gave everybody different. Most people different. So just to go back to your comment, they did do the 4 trials,
Yeah.
right? And you can see the decoupling of the variable here to some extent.
Yeah.
But how that plays out in your perception is a totally different thing. You're totally right.
That's just like someone goes through anything stats, like change anything and everything goes out.
Yeah, almost everything has changed.
Yeah, everything goes out. You see how the results don't matter.
Yeah. Okay, preference-wise, so guys,
Guys?
so whether or not you could detect a difference is one thing, but whether or not you liked one over the other is another question. So totally 50-50 split. Wow. 9 people like the fermented under pressure. 9 people like the traditional lager. So again, this further validates nobody is going to know.
Question here. Because the question based on it was, do you prefer the one you identified as odd one out? So the thing is, if you got that wrong, that would change which one you preferred.
Yeah, but
Because, for
you'd still
example, I
prefer.
said I preferred B, which was not the odd one out.
So I'm doing the math behind the scenes.
Okay.
I'm checking the key
Okay.
for your cups, and then figuring out what the absolute beer is.
Okay, so you're comparing to the one you identified
So
versus...
this is absolute, what you had is relative. Does that make sense? This is the real
Yeah,
translated results. Does that make sense?
kind of.
It's apples to apples. Believe me, I had to do a bunch of mental arithmetic to get through this, but this works. I tested it.
Well, because my thing is, for example, like I didn't like B,
Yeah.
so I said I did not like B,
So then I
but
would.
I don't know which one I preferred out of these
So what
two.
I would have done is I said, okay, which one did? What's your number? 14.
This
So
one's the odd one
14
out,
to
but I
B,
don't
yeah.
know which one I prefer.
But I do. I
No,
know.
because I said this one tasted yeasty,
But I know which one's in that cup.
but it's yeasty.
Yeah. Okay. That's just.
Is this a large sample size?
For statistics, technically, yeah, it is. Technically, anything over 3 is enough, but the variance is huge. The more people you have, the smaller your variance.
So we can do experience or something.
Yeah, you could calculate the math with 3 people.
Wife and another.
Well, to get B below 0.05, you need at least 1 to
Well, if you had 3 samples, all 3 would have to get it correct for a p-value less than 0.05. So you'd have to have a 100% success rate with 3 people. Since we had 18 people, we can get by with less. It's roughly, I think, half, but we didn't even hit half. We got 7 out of 18. So. And the preferences, again, split right down the middle. Comparison-wise, these are pretty similar too. Maltiness right down the center. Says somewhat lower in maltiness on the fermented, but it's basically the same. Hoppiness, basically the same.
Did you rule out like
Yeah, this is only taking into account people that said that they were going to fancy it. Yeah, 0 does not average into this yet. Yeast character, I think I know why yeast character is there, probably because you got a mouthful of yeast.
I tried not to skew the data, I just gave it like 75%.
Okay, it is what it is. Bitterness, right down the center. Carbonation, that's interesting. Somewhat higher for the fermented under pressure. These work forced carb at the same time, same pressure, same temperature. Could be an issue with the boil here. And
you think it's carbonation?
yeah, like smooth and then,
Like body can impact when they're not.
yeah. Yeah, it's hard to decouple those things. And body is basically in line with carbonation, kind of like you mentioned there. So somewhat higher for the fermented under pressure. Balance right down the center. So on the whole, these are pretty much the same. Nothing's wildly skewing to one side. Off flavors. Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Oh, wow. How many is each of these check marks? Like,
So
is
yeah,
that
good
one
question.
person?
This is down here.
Oh, yeah, 1.
3 is here. So the biggest detector is the acetaldehyde. I thought that I picked up acetaldehyde as well in the traditional lager as well. DMS 1, so this is one person, stringency, estrogen, and some comments. B and C had softer mouthfeel from Andre. B and C were the fermented under pressure. So, and you guessed correctly. B and C are less yeast forward, slightly less biscuit. Hops are balanced. B and C are different actually in Hager's responses. I'm really putting you guys on trial. Incredibly similar, anonymous. You should have put your name because you're dead on.
That is his name.
This is me. I thought I got some green apple notes in the aroma.
Did you get it wrong?
I got it wrong. JD, you guessed it correctly, so.
Typical AF.
Super tasty.
That's for bold.
Did Super Taste to get it right, though?
Super tasty got it incorrect.
Not a
Not so super. So just to wrap up, I only got like a couple slides here. Toss through this. Sorry. This. So to recap, basically they were the same beer. I would say statistically they are the same beer. If you want to try making a lager at home without a fridge, I say go for it. I don't think anybody will notice the difference. And if they say they can, show them this data and say, no, you're not. The pros of this, obviously, you can make lagers faster potentially because you're going to ferment faster. You don't have to get that expensive cooling equipment. Hop aroma might be an advantage there, like Marcello mentioned. You're not losing as many vapors. You're going to trap in the beer. Lower biomass, lower yeast amounts might help with hop flavor. Glycerol production is an interesting thing. At higher temperatures, more glycerol is typically produced, which can lead to a higher mouthfeel without any flavor implications. That can be a good thing. But the cons are you might get some sulfur. You might get extra fusel alcohols like that paper mentioned. You need a pressure-rated vessel, so you don't want to make a bomb in your house. And this is non-traditional, so if that matters to you, it matters to you.
So you would this is saying you have to do it at pressure though. If you're doing it at 20 degrees, you could ferment a lager at 20 degrees and not under pressure.
It would be,
you haven't done that, is it?
it would be gross. Probably.
So
Very,
okay,
very
so the pressure's what's making a difference.
Yeah.
Use 3470.
Actually, yeah, no joke. You can, Marcelo, 3470 as like an overall, you know, clean fermenter. You can ferment with 3470 and 3470 and get a really good lager at 18 to 20 degrees. Easily.
I was going to say 18 for 3470.
Yeah.
I started with 15.
Yeah.
So, you know, 3 days.
Yeah.
Then for 18 and forget about it.
That's pretty good.
Essentially forget.
Yeah, that's pretty high.
So if you got sulfur, not enough yeast, not enough O2,
Right.
and use alcohol, you abuse. So you have to start slow, at least 24 hours. You gotta keep it at 15 or less, because you know, what is this? Well, if you do starters is one thing, but if you get straight powder, you know, the dry yeast they put in there, you know, oh, it's sugar, we gotta eat. Oh, wait, what is sugar? You know, it takes time. But if they have a starter, they go right away. You don't get fused at all. So it depends all on the entire market.
I think that dry would be quicker.
No, they don't know what it is. They came out of the lab and then, oh, it's food. Well, is it?
What when you put in fish dry yeast, you don't have, they say fill oxygen. You need it 30 in. When you have, you refit, you liquid, you should oxygenate it.
I put dry yeast and I have an E-line when it goes from the grain cluster, goes to the fermenter. I put an E-line there, tiny bottle of O2. You need your O2 right there, and I put the dry yeast. It works.
Because the manufacturer recommendation is if your pitch is dry, you don't need to oxygenate. But if you're repitching or you're using liquid, then you oxygenate. And I find it's quicker takeoff if you're using dry yeast than oxygen.
Well, dry yeast will give you a little more. Usually your pitch rate is higher with dry yeast. Usually. If you're not making a starter, you're going to have more yeast in the packet. So that's going to kick off faster. Oxygen, I think,
it's faster, you get probably that is the bottom line.
Remember, like more
Wait
yeast,
till you get a starter.
more yeast is going to require a lot more oxygen to keep that procreation happening in the yeast that's in there. Right. So if you have a huge pitch, you know, lager plus size pitches, you need to oxygenate because if you don't, they're just going to get lazy, not do anything, you'll have a stall or whatever is going to happen in that situation, right? Dry yeast, yeah, you can pitch it right in, but there's a lot of shock that happens to those yeast when they're pitched into, say, 1060 words, and they're going, what the hell am I being pitched into? So, like, even with dry yeast, I will always condition that yeast and start that yeast so that it understands where it's going, and then I can pitch into that. I mean, I'm not saying the manufacturers are wrong. Like, they make the yeast. I'm just saying in my experience and the way that I've made beer, pouring that dry yeast directly into your keg or into your carboy or conical is, like,
You're rolling the dice, right?
you really are. Yeah. You're rolling the dice as to whether or not you're getting off flavors from stressed yeast.
So after 200 batches doing exactly what you did,
Yeah.
I always did because I was always afraid, right?
Yeah.
And now I gave the 3, maybe now 4 batches. I said, to hell with it. I just sprayed the thing, what it does, I balance how many grams, 5. How many grams will go on? 20, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Oh,
Same, exact same.
Yeah, I was always afraid just that. You know, at least half an hour, I want to see that foam outside, and then I drop it in. I just put the freaking dry there, and I have a scale.
Yeah.
So I know how much I'm putting, right? I put it back.
I mean,
Bring it, put it back.
I look at it this way, using things like Fermaid and those other type of you know, helpers for the yeast is beneficial no matter how you look at it, right? It's an extra cost and it's an extra step. But if you want healthy yeast in the end, you do what you have to do to get that healthy yeast. Pitching it directly into your beer isn't always the best idea, but you can get excellent results from pitching directly into your beer.
sounds like this could be a good follow-up experiment.
Yeah.
See if it actually matters. Okay. It's really the only way to test it. But that's it. That's all I got for you. Any questions from you guys?
I want to say thanks, Josh, for doing the experiment, and it was a lot of fun. It was really interesting, and I really liked how interactive it was with the how you set it up with the QR code. It was really cool. Oh yeah. For those if you're curious about pressure fermentation and lagers, I will tell you that all of my lagers are pressure fermented, right?
What yeast?
Depends, right? I've used 3470, and I would agree. 3470, and there's something about it under pressure where it's just like so much sulfur that gets produced. And so now what I do is I'm using Escarpment's premium pills mostly, right? Except for certain lagers. Like for the Helles, I use like an actual Munich strain, right? But those lagers, when you produce them under pressure, yeah, the turnaround time is faster. I will always guarantee you, final gravity will be hit well before 9 days. I give it 9 days, but 9 days is done. Now, it doesn't mean you're drinking 9 days, right? Because it's still, you got to transfer, you still got to cold crash, you got to let it sit, it's got to mature a bit, right? So, but those beers, that's what got me a golden cow tank, right? That Helles, so that's always under pressure. And I can guarantee you, when I first started doing this, I remember posting on the Reddit homebrewing forum. That was a big mistake, right? And I mentioned, I want to do like pressure fermentation lagers, and I got killed because everyone's like, that's not a real lager. You'll never do. Oh, it's gonna suck. It's gonna tear. Gold, 40 out of 50, blind, right? So there's something to be said for this, right? There's definitely something to do. I don't know. I would never do a Belgian under pressure, right? Because that's counterintuitive. Yeah, it's counterintuitive. Oh.
My belt is under pressure.
Oh! Well then maybe that would be an
There's
experiment.
one difference. When you start on the lager has CO2,
Yeah.
the belt is under pressure.
Oh, okay.
Because you want a little bit of ester from the beginning.
Yeah.
And then it's a different.
Interesting, right? Because I've only just recently brewed a saison after 5 years, so shows you how often I brew Belgians, right? So
How long do you cold crash?
3 days with the German pills I did recently. I went on vacation, I had it sitting there. It was cold crash for like 2 weeks, right? Now it does help, I'll guarantee you, it helps clarity 100%.
So do you also use like Irish moss?
Everything I can to help that out to get it clear. So clarity firm when I pitch my yeast, work flock or Irish moss. You can use biofine, right?
Yeah, whatever. But I mean, it's
Hey, share you guys up.
We have beers here that we'd like you guys all to try. The 2 beers that are on tap here were both brewed with genetically altered yeast. I'm not going to tell you what yeast, but I didn't bring my comment sheets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post on the club page, and you guys, if you can remember, give me your comments on what you found in these 2 beers, what you can point out, and whether or not you can find out or figure out what yeast was actually used. and I know it's impossible. I'm giving you guys like the impossibility here. But this is not an A/B test. This is based on 2 yeasts that have brewed 2 beers that should not have been brewed with this style of yeast. And I was surprised by the results. So come up, try them. Anybody can come up, grab your cups. I did not.
Oh, it was awesome. That was so cool, right? Because I noticed that too. I was like, there's art. He knew you've adjusted it so that it knows, the script knows when I've chosen therefore. Well, that's awesome. No, it worked really well. I'd love to see more of this.
Yeah, I think it'd be fun. There's so many things we could test, like we just talked about.
Yeah. Like this type of stuff, like, it'd be interesting. I mean, I'd love to see. I'd love to see.
Yeah, me too. Belgium would be very rich.
Yes, right? To see if there's, I would think there must be.
There has to be.
So you like to see
Yeah, you have to have. All right.
Yeah, the low temperature is getting banana.
What is Belgian IPA? Sorry,
I want to do that, but